Part 1, Chapter 4, Sinful Marionette. I awoke the next morning with a stiff pain in my neck and both arms stuffed inside my shirt. Rolling from my side onto my back, I popped both arms through my sleeves like a turtle and stretched them as far as I could. Both elbows popped loudly, and a jolt of nerves ran up and down my bones. Foggy, I remained flat for the time being, waiting patiently for my brain and body to arrive at an acceptable lucidity. Once I had finally rubbed the sticky dust from my tear ducts, I rose with bleary eyes. A high-pitched beeping slapped my eardrums and caused me to tense. Reaching with little strength, I slapped the snooze button on my alarm clock, then slid the switch off. I rose out of bed completely zombified and pressed my warm feet to the floor. Attracted to the window, I waddled and arrived, unbalanced. I twisted the rod and expanded the shades, squinting at the new daylight. Optimism presented itself, but I knew better than to start the day off with good intentions. A raw dose of cynicism is the best pretense in my experience. I could see the bulkhead door was closed, appearing perfectly normal under any other circumstance. And yet I got this disturbed feeling while ogling at the paint chips. I imagined black smoke billowing out and making a dash for my window, or some kind of monster maybe opening it up to reveal its long, bony arm. This imagination was simply a continuation of the irrational fears that kept me upright mere hours ago. I stepped back and took my time getting ready for school. A white tank top under another plain old t-shirt, both zipped under a hoodie. Standard baby blue stonewashed jeans, and my only pair of sneakers. I wasn't going to be setting any new fashion trends today, and that's how I liked it. As soon as I was ready, I threw my door open and made my way down the stairs. Taking the corner with medium haste, I was met by the sight of my dad melting into the couch. His empty stare was glued to the news playing over the TV. "Morning, Dad," I said plainly, slowing myself. No response. Momentum carried me just past the end table to his right, and I glared despondently. A few seconds without acknowledgement left me feeling dejected. An intentional brunt sigh signaled my departure. With a lax jaw, I dragged myself out the front door and hopped down the short steps, embracing the morning chill. Curling around his car and arriving at the end of the driveway, I glanced down the road to my left and could see the bus approaching from about half a mile away. It was on its way back from the dead-end turnaround a little further that way, a collective of houses I only ever saw while riding the afternoon bus, a place I never explored on my own. A thin layer of fog rolled over the pavement, refracting the headlights and making the road glow as it got closer. It arrived with a dainty squeal of its brakes and a low huff from the exhaust. I stepped up to the bus doors and waited for the driver to open them, but she seemed preoccupied with the radio. My eyes wandered to the fogged-up windows where I caught a glimpse of heads against the glass. Some were sleeping, others were just enjoying the cool glass against their skull. Some were moving around and talking, almost as if they were excited, but I guarantee nobody wanted to be at school today. It's Wednesday, halfway done with the week. Finally, the doors opened, and I stepped up and took my seat. Like most other times before, I placed my bag between the wall and myself and used it as a makeshift pillow. The bus released its brakes and started the drive. Thankfully, my bus ride was short going in, so all I had to do was stuff my hands in my pockets, get warm, get comfortable, and wait. Behind closed eyes, opaque distilled figments of the bus ride fluttered around my drowsy perception. Little bumps and murmurs from the groggy and tireless alike. Somewhat peaceful, but melancholy in its own unique way. In 10 or so minutes we arrived. Everyone unloaded and waited in the lunchroom for the first period bell, then collectively wobbled in a dense cloud of warm flesh toward our individual beginnings for the day. However, as I took my seat in my first class and attempted to prepare myself for instruction, I kept circling back to this nagging feeling. Some emptiness that had been haunting me since I got out of bed. A slight headache and an almost ghost-like separation from my skin. I was lagging, and every active motion around me seemed somewhat disconnected. I attributed this to just early morning pains, not uncommon and certainly not the worst I've felt, but it was odd to say the least. What really bothered me was this little crackling noise that crept up as silence pervaded, like gristle meat slow-cooked by a hairdryer on the other side of a wooden wall, always behind my head no matter which way I turned. I popped my jaw and depressurized my ears a few times, but nothing helped. It was during the second period when that noise took on a different frequency. Now, it was a light humming. At this point, I was pretty fed up with whatever auditory anomalies latched onto me, and I just wanted something else to focus on. I don't even remember third period, which is unsurprising because as much as I find history fascinating, we had been covering small-scale wars and those just bored me. Next was art class. And there, I was finally able to set aside everything that wasn't the thin sheet of paper in front of me. As a result, a full-focus but half-assed doodle came to life. A 3/4 turn profile picture of some anime character I occasionally drew. As much as I praised my own ability to draw eyes and hair, the symmetry just wasn't right and I couldn't commit to drawing below the collarbone. Disappointed overall, I proceeded with shading and tried not to be too harsh on myself. Some mid-level banter from the others at my table plucked my eardrums like a rigid guitar string. I didn't hear their words, just inflections and general emotions. Halfway through class, the headache I struggled with all morning started to grow, along with a high-pitched ringing in my ears. Once or twice, I let out a pained grunt and shuffled uncomfortably in my seat, drawing the attention of some kids, but not enough to generate questions. I jammed my elbow on the surface and set my pencil aside, resting my head in my open palm and closing my eyes for a minute. It didn't make sense. This wasn't like the cramps and aches I was used to with my period, which were usually mild. I don't know. Hell, maybe my diet needs changing. I started to feel more drowsy propped up like this. When the bell finally rang for lunch, I kept myself seated while everyone else got up and hurried out the door. I slowly assembled my few items but had no motivation to get up. The teacher, Mrs. Phillips, noticed me still in the room and called out from her desk in the corner. "Miss Avery, did you hear the bell?" I looked up with bags under my eyes and a general look of befuddlement. "Yeah, I'm just not feeling very well." She started to stand, but her hip seemed to bother her, so she leaned over the desk in a half-upright position. "Do you need me to call the nurse?" No, it's alright. Actually, would it be okay if I spent lunch in here?" "Oh, absolutely, darling. By all means. I have some raisins and crackers for my son if you'd like some." She gestured to her desk. Her son, Xavier Phillips, is one of the few autistic kids in the school who has been accompanied by an aide wherever he goes. Sweet kid, but makes a lot of the girls uncomfortable with how he acts sometimes. I forgot he was her son. I kindly denied. "Thank you, but I think I just need some sleep." She gave a concerned smile and lowered herself back into the chair. "Alrighty. I won't be going anywhere, so if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." I smiled back and nodded. The ringing in my head had become quieter, now contested by ambient silence. My stomach growled almost immediately, as if to directly counter my denial of food. I ignored it. I set my bag on the floor beside me and folded my arms over the table. The fabric of my long sleeves provided just enough cushion for me to get comfortable, and soon I was in a tranquil, floating state. Not quite asleep, but borderline resting. In this state, I picked up on chatter outside the classroom door, a rumble of a passing plane overhead and the caw of a crow outside. Though I probably imagined the crow. The nearest cluster of trees was about 80 feet from the school, so there's no way I picked up on that. I felt warmed by the ceiling lights. Their individual hums coiled my bones and beckoned me further into my own head. My lips parted, muscles engaged to hold me slipped, and my tightly bound fist from the headache loosened. Almost asleep, almost dreaming. A wordless whisper propped my right eye open, hazily looking past my shoulder toward a blur of plastered wall art. The room felt darker all of a sudden, more dangerous, but I wasn't afraid. "Is that tapping I hear?" I blinked, or I thought. In actuality, my eye opened for the first time, and I saw the real wall with real art, not my imagined visual. Or did I fall asleep again? Why do I feel so? Is someone in the corner of the room? I forcibly sat up in fright, startling Miss Phillips and causing my back to crack. I yelped as I reached the height of my rise, and she did too. We locked eyes. My hair stood on end and both eyes bugged out. She put her hand on her chest. "You scared the life out of me." A light-hearted chuckle. "What was it? A bad dream?" Stunned, body sizzling with electricity, I locked onto one ceiling tile almost directly above me. The floor swayed and blood rushed to my ears as reality warped into the mold of something I could understand. I settled on her now worried expression, my own fingers twitching and numb. My mouth moved, but nothing came out. The lights were out, yet her shadow was painted clearly on the wall behind her. Dancing? No. Swaying like a billowing flame. I mouthed again. "Were you talking?" is what I intended, but again, no noise broke from my throat. A twisted grin split across her face, then melted into a terrifying scowl. I felt people around me, circling me, staring. Looking around revealed no one, nothing but empty tables and slanted walls. When I looked back, she was gone. Only her shadow remained, stuck to the wall like a two-dimensional prison. The ringing was back, deeper than before, but abrupt. It came and went like a horn, echoing on and on, running down the vacant hallways away from me. Then, I felt something touch my shoulder. I awoke for real, much calmer than before in my dream. I lifted my head with a fabric crease on my face, and one eye stuck at the lashes. Mrs. Phillips was standing before me, using her cane to steady herself and touching my shoulder gently. "Kimberly, that was the first bell," she said sweetly. The bell?" I repeated. "Lunch is over." A pleasant smile. I stared at her for a solid few seconds, reallocating the fragments of my mind still lost in the caverns of my skull. A glance at the clock declared the passage of time and left me in a fleeting limbo. I cleared my throat and raised upright. Groggy, I spoke. "Thank you again for letting me nap." She tilted her head with a wider smile, the edge of her round glasses magnifying the wall behind her. "I hope you feel refreshed." She then set 2 palm-sized boxes of raisins on the table in front of me. I stood up, scooping the little boxes, and watched her hobble back to the desk for her next class. My thighs were heavy and my feet were cold, but I made my way to the door in the corner and pulled it inward, dropping the stopper and letting the bustle of traffic enter. "See you tomorrow," I called out, acting lively so she wouldn't be concerned. She waved, and I was off, into the sea of chaotic directions. I do feel refreshed, that's for sure. As I made my way to my locker, I ripped the top off both snacks, and one after the other, I jiggled the little raisins in my mouth and consumed both boxes in no time. The containers were discarded into the wall-mounted trash can, and I picked up the pace. The cacophony of voices almost reduced my senses to pure automation. Weaving between halted conversations and daring blind sprints, I pulled my arms in close and let the warm blood propel my muscles. Like a thin projectile, as I always do. In no time, I reached my locker and quickly undid the lock. I felt somewhat safe and anonymous in the active crowd, nestled between a few other kids who were neck-deep in their own lockers close by. However, while the metallic door clanged and warbled from the vibrations of my shuffling, I was oblivious to the sneaking in the background. Strangely, I did feel something at my back, but shrugged it off as just people idling. I was wrong. Someone kicked the back of my right knee and disrupted my stance, causing my leg to bend into the locker and my shin to bash hard into the metal bottom-tier shelf. The locker reverberated from the impact, and I dropped the textbook I was holding to plant my hand flat against the inner wall, catching myself. Icy throbbing shot up my shin and stole my breath, forfeiting a yelp of pain as I partly turned around to see the obvious. As my stare met hers, she replayed the motion of splashing water on my face. The cup was empty, and the action just made me jump back and bump my head on the top shelf of my locker. Stacy nearly sputtered with restrained laughter at my jumpiness. "Oh my god, Kim, jumpy much?" she mocked, the empty cup inches from my face. My nerves burned with anxiety, slowly replaced by fed-up rage and unhinged thoughts. My entire face scrunched inward, brows sharp and teeth almost merging from the biting pressure. I pushed out of my locker with force, making her stumble back a step, and shouted, "One day!" Some surrounding students watched, while most others ignored the scene. "You can't go one fucking day without being a total jerk?" She dropped the cup to the floor and put one hand on her hip, confidently grinning back at me. With her other hand, she reached out and took hold of the hair in the middle of my forehead, close to the scalp, and used it as an anchor to push me back into the locker again. I fell into it at an odd angle, my shoulder bumping the edge of my feet not in the right stance to hold my weight without strain. She held my hair tight and pressed me hard. "Let go!" I grabbed her wrist with one hand while the other helped me stay upright by holding the locker frame. I tried to pull her hand away, but it only worsened the pain. She leaned in, face to face. I peeled open one eye, the other eye tight from wincing pain, and asked, "Why won't you just leave me alone?" Her voice was off, not her usual playful sinister. It was almost serious in a way I've never heard from her. "You deserve this. That's why. Now say it." "Fuck off," I stated. "Say it!" she shouted, now causing a wave of quiet to wash over the spectators. My bottom lip quivered, and a tear slipped from my right eye. The sharp pain in my scalp trudged up the headache all over again. "I'm sorry." The words fumbled stiffly from my lips. She let me go right away. Without another word, she turned with a huff and stomped away, leaving me with tens of eyes glued to my recovering pose. I scratched my scalp and wiped a single tear from my cheek, furious and stricken with thoughts of kicking her ass. I connected with a few students, who looked away as I caught their glances. Embarrassed and fuming, I picked up the textbook I dropped and slotted it into my bag. A normal atmosphere returned like it never happened. Everyone went about their business, no one asked if I was okay or offered any sympathy. Whatever. I don't want it anyway. I finished in my locker and shut it tight, spinning the lock and securing my bag over my shoulders. When I turned around to head to class, I was met with something I didn't expect. Standing where Stacy had been, almost too close as I turned around, was a taller boy with neck-length acorn brown hair and a black track jacket. He faced down the hall, the right side of his face partially visible to me, looking on with a focused stare. The sliver of his iris that wasn't hidden behind sharp bangs was a beautiful emerald green. The paleness of his skin stuck out as almost sickly, and he had this very small horizontal scar below his cheekbone. Though he wasn't looking at me, I could feel his intent glued to my shape. Some other sense clashed with something invisible wrapped around his skin and coiled around even the smallest veins. I can't explain the sudden feeling. Tongue-tied, I anticipated him mocking me or giving some sarcastic comment. Instead, we just stood there in the hall in a pregnant silence for about 20 seconds, unmoving, merely existing. Then, he spoke. "Don't let her get to you." His voice was pleasant, though slightly rough. "She's not worth it." He slipped both hands into his pockets and kept his stare focused down the hall. I got this feeling that he wanted to look into my eyes, but couldn't. Like he wasn't allowed to. It made my stomach twist and churn. My throat was dry, and my defenses were raised. "What would you know about it?" He blinked, and I could see the glossiness reflect from the overhead lights. A different shade of color over his irises, a hint of purple. He let out a slow breath, and I could see his chest deflate. Be patient and kind. It'll be okay. Then, cryptically, he started to walk away. Subsumed into the crowd as the final minute of intermission started, I watched him vanish around the corner, and I sank a little deeper into myself, perplexed and suddenly nauseous. The rest of the day seemed to fly by. Autopilot engaged during math class when I was taking a pre-test worksheet, making me emotionless and robotic. The grips of automation only released me when I exited the school's front doors. I mean, compared to the typical Stacy encounter and my own mental stifle, everything else seemed mundane enough to not even register in my recent memory. Greeted once again by the hovering sun, I felt a lingering sense of déjà vu. Every day was the same as the one before, with only minor differences to break the illusion that I am trapped within some eternal cycle. Those were my thoughts as I sat down on the bus. The ride home wasn't anything special. The same path, the same speeds, the same trees and buildings, all scrolling by as nothing more than blobs of color. I slowed down my comprehension and really absorbed the little details of what I was seeing. I saw the shades of verdant green mixed in the far-reaching canopies. The contrasted blue above made streams and puddles glisten with life. Every small bird and animal is complacent to this brief life and exists merely to exist. It truly is beautiful, and lately, I've lost sight of that. To me, it's like living in a fishbowl. Sure, once in a while a new decoration might be added, or maybe my owner moves a lamp and the lighting is different, but the water is still murky, and my life is a circle. That's the perspective shift I've accommodated over these 8 years. But that's not the complete picture. To other people, this road may be their favorite to walk in the morning. That random house I so quickly dismiss is perhaps the most cherished location in someone's life. These trees are the inspiration to some artist or writer out there. All manner of life is brimming with memories and love, and nothing is truly pointless, even if I fail to see the value anymore. I began tapping my shoes into the underside of the unoccupied seat in front of me and hummed nonsensical tunes to pass the time, stewing in my conflicting thoughts. Anger is always just below the surface, tempting adrenaline that can hardly be channeled properly. But those little positives help numb that energy, a quaint optimism to return home and make this day just a little better. When the bus finally pulled up to my house, I stumbled down the lane and nearly tripped descending the steps. It was cooler here compared to school, maybe 6 degrees less given all the tree coverage, but 78 is still pretty warm for me, and the sparse clouds did no favors this time of day. The bus departed by the time I reached halfway up the driveway and glided my fingers along my dad's car. When I reached the front door, I felt a pressure in my chest that sent a zap to my fingertips. My lips smacked, and I sniffled, suddenly feeling expansive and dirty. My skin crawled as I opened the door, announced by creaking hinges and a sucking draft. The first thing I saw when the door shut behind me was my dad leading into the fridge. Cautious, I removed my shoes and set them safely aside, then noticed the trash can pulled right up beside him. I was going to greet him, but remembered him ignoring me this morning. So in a bout of immature mirroring, I decided to stay quiet and started moving toward the hall. He took something heavy from the fridge and slammed it into the empty trash can with intentional force. Right away, I sensed his compacted rage and hurried my next few steps. I reached the underbelly of the balcony when his voice boomed. "Stop!" I finished my step and halted, my mind lagging. Wearily, I turned toward him, and he met my worried eyes with an impatient glower. "What?" I said as monotonely as I could. He slammed the fridge door shut. Jars and glasses jingled loudly inside. He walked with an authoritative strut toward me and harshly grabbed me by the ear. "Ow, ow, ow! That hurts!" I shouted. He dragged me toward the fridge and bent me over the trash can, his hand gripping the back of my head to ensure I lined up with what he wanted me to see. "Do you see this?" He let go of my ear and my head, and I remained hunched. I looked down to see a few bowls of leftover food, 2 milk cartons, eggs, mayonnaise, yogurt, and bread all resting in a stinky, messy pile at the bottom. I stood up and looked at him in genuine confusion. What happened? This is what happens when you let the refrigerator stay turned off all night and half the day. Spoiled food, he growled. A stout breath lodged in my throat. But that doesn't make any sense. How did it all go bad so quickly? I questioned. What does it matter? The food is rotten, and now I have to replace the stuff I just bought, he stated. I'm sorry, Dad. I did as you asked and went to the basement to fix it, but then the door shut behind me and I heard weird noises. Jesus fuck, here we go. He exhaustedly wrung his hands. No, I'm serious. I saw something with yellow eyes in the basement, and I thought I saw someone standing at the upstairs railing before that, I pleaded. To my surprise, his expression altered. Now both eyes were squinted in skeptical consideration, and his pursed lips seemed to pinch tighter than I thought possible. What did you just say? A deadly serious undertone gave his appearance a bold outline. I stammered. I saw a person on my balcony? He gripped both my shoulders, looking into my eyes hard, searching. He hastily spoke in an almost demeaning seriousness. You said yellow eyes. Was it a stray cat? My head gently shook. No, it looked like a tall person. I only saw it briefly. He continued to dissect the folds of skin around my eyes, the little tremble of my blue irises, and the expansion of both my pupils. It was uncomfortable for a few reasons, but mainly in the way that he's never looked at me for this long, unbroken. He inhaled sharply through his nose. You've always had an active imagination. Your mind was playing tricks on you. Trembling and massively confused, I just nodded slightly. Okay. A long pause swelled between us. He seemed distant, less angry, but that didn't mean I wasn't walking on hot embers. I waited for his grip on my shoulders to shift and for the hard slap on the back of my head to come, but he just looked off to the side, unfocused. Dad, is the house haunted? I asked, almost childlike. He scoffed, looked me up and down, and released me. He then retrieved the broken flashlight from the counter and showed it to me before dumping it into the trash can. No, the house isn't fucking haunted. You're just weird and crazy, and you owe me a flashlight. He snarled. Sarcasm was up front, but the degrading implication was skillfully woven between each word. Ashamed, cautious, and defensive, I folded both arms over my chest and made tight little fists, watching him internally debate. Guilt and a desire to please him churned my next words. Can I help you clean or something? A heavy sigh, like he was still trying to hold on to the anger, but it was fleeting. No, just go to your room and don't bother me anymore tonight. You don't want me to do the dishes or vacuum? Go! He suddenly turned and shouted right in my face. I went sheet white and jumped back, bracing for a hit. When it didn't come, I hastily dashed around him and headed for the stairs. And don't fucking run! I'm not taking you to the hospital if you break your arm falling up the stairs. I slowed as he demanded, using the thin railing to support my speedy walk. I took extra care not to shut my door too loud, and once I was inside, I shivered and quaked. I didn't feel safe, and now I had last night skipping on the surface of my consciousness like a stone that refused to sink. I stood there in morbid pity, one step into my room with my back to the door and facing the window. Frozen, burning, overloaded. I waited for the jittering to stop, but it didn't. I don't know how long I dissociated. My mind just seemed to melt into a coagulated blob of every random zooming thought and emotion. My face remained the same, eyes half peeled open, mouth straight and pressed tight, brows low and casting a shadow. My body slumped and barely engaged enough to pass as a straw mannequin. His loud cleaning went unnoticed, and the room became darker as an entire hour bled away. I couldn't shake it, this crushing, silent hysteria. Shadow people, voices, strange noises, and sudden sickness. None of this was new to me, and none of it typically scared me that bad. I tended to believe the people who told me I was just making it up for attention, or that I was actually just crazy. Another justification? Hallucinations, auditory or visual, weren't uncommon for those with underlying mental illnesses. I've read a little about it on the school's computers, and caught programs on TV. All of that just made me feel even more alone. I can't talk about it. No one will listen. It would seem another hour passed me by. It was almost 6, and I had, at some point, moved to the bed. I can't recall. Face dry, I blinked and rubbed the muted expression away. I slowly assimilated back into my body and sat up. The room was much darker now. Silent, calm. I viewed this room as a cage floating in abyssal nothing, and it only existed because I knew it to be real. Should I stop believing, it would crumble. My back cracked as I slid off the bed. Uninspired, I dragged my feet and placed myself in front of the small window, staring into the trees. There was enough light to still watch the clouds slide past the varying tips, inspiring enough to draw, though I'd like to paint it if I had the tools. For now, it's a snapshot, and I'll forget it in a day. Today, the clouds moved leisurely, carried by a gentle breeze to an unknown destination, to provide shade for another and allow warmth in its wake. It felt odd, placed in the woods like this. No surrounding lights, and when it got dark, even the moon had a hard time reaching the ground beneath the foliage. I didn't prepare these words, nor did I realize I was saying them until I did. I wish... A tight fist curled up in one hand, then slowly released as the tension escaped. I wish I was somebody. That sentiment lingered, raw and sweating pessimism. I thought about Joey and how I wanted to call him and tell him about my day. I wanted to visit Stacy and play in her yard like we used to. I wanted to open my door and see my mother happily preparing dinner. Things have changed. As had become habit, I won't get anything to eat until after he goes to bed. My feet carried me over to the door where my bag lay forgotten on its side. I took the door handle and carefully opened it a 2-inch crack, letting the flooding noise of the television creep in. All lights were off downstairs, and the emptiness permeated. Whatever he was watching sounded old. The audio was compressed and tinny. Reruns of shows from his childhood, I assumed. Thinking of my dad ever being my age made no sense. I couldn't picture it, especially with a lack of photos in this house. We've never paid for a school photo. He's never sat me down and showed me any of his parents or himself, not even a photo of Mom. I wondered who I looked like more, and prayed it was her. It's been 8 years. I should remember her face, but I don't. Not really. There are dreams and pieces of moments that I could recall, but only in broad strokes. As far as I understood it, and for what I've been told, trauma caused repression, and my own brain started scrubbing the source of my pain. I only wish it hadn't scrubbed with a metallic brush. Now, it's just black splotchy holes of the time before. Still listening to the TV uttering nonsense, I lay on the floor and used my backpack as a pillow, peering through the crack of the door and watching the gray flashes beyond the railing. My eyes shut, and I carefully imagined the two of us sitting on the couch, enjoying a crime drama or black and white movie. Popcorn, soda, laughter. His occasional dumb jokes were so bad or cheesy that I couldn't help but laugh. His refrained excitement to spout random bits of knowledge whenever the opportunity arose. That fickle, passionate side of him I rarely saw, and he swiftly tried to hide. I swallowed hard and exhaled through my nose. I wish